Dragma Invoked is the latest in a long line of invoked archetypes that started way back during Zodiac format in March 2017 with the ultimate anti-Zoo deck, Windwitch Artifact Invoked. Most recently, we've seen Shaddoll Invoked and Eldritch Invoked, but the Dragma build seems to be most similar to that oldest version of the deck for a few reasons. For some of you noobs who weren't playing in 2017, lucky you, the Windwitch Artifact build hard countered the meta at the time, which consisted in pretty much entirely of Zodiac variants like Pure, Kaiju, and Metal foes, due to the interaction of 3 engines that each individually countered the deck. Windwitches put a Crystal Wing on the field with just 1 card, and Crystal Wing was often enough to end a Zoo player's turn. If it wasn't, their extender could be dealt with by the Book of Moon effect of INVOCATION, and if both of those failed, or failed to be drawn, Artifact Scythe equaled a skip turn for pretty much any meta deck. In addition, the average ratios of the 3 engines put you at just 22 cards, 11 from Invoked, 6 from Windwitch, and 5 from Artifact, which meant that you had 18 slots to throw in general purpose disruption like Ghost Ogre, Mystical Space Typhoon, and the ubiquitous Dimensional Barrier. The Dragma Invoked deck takes a similar multifaceted approach to countering spammy decks with the presence of 3 archetypes and plenty of extra space to fill. But times have changed and power has creeped, so this latest Invoked variant has more options and gains more card advantage while performing its strategy than Windwitch Artifact Invoked could have ever dreamed, such is the nature of Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2020. And that's a good thing for fans of the deck, because while Zoo was the only spammy deck in spring of 2017, these days spammy decks are everywhere. Even Eldritch has evolved from a set 4 control deck to a synchro spam deck over the past 6 weeks. To help you better understand the Dragma Invoked strategy, I'll be taking you through each part of the deck and explaining how they complement each other and interact with the opponent, starting with the Invoked core. The Invoked engine is the first line of play you'll take during each game, if it's available. You'll be going straight into Mechaba. No fancy combos, just normal summon Alistair, search Invocation, link into Salamander at Almirage, then Secure Gardener, and fuse Alistair and Secure Gardener into Mechaba. 4 summons and you've already got protection from Nibiru, so that's nifty. Although I've been on 3 invocations for 2 years now, in this deck, I don't think it's necessary. Drawing Invocation without Alistair is worse here than anywhere else because you'll have literally no use for it. You aren't extending into Invoker of Madness as a backup play. Invocation's just dead. You'll be going first, so you'll be dealing with less potential disruption. Play the 3 Call by the Grave before you start worrying about playing 3 invocations, because at least Call by the Grave has some utility here. Invocation just doesn't. Anyway, the Invoked play sets up the rest of the deck, but it's pretty linear and obvious, so let's move on to the new stuff, the Dragma core. The new Dragma archetype has a pretty unique mechanic. They don't summon from the extra deck, but they dump extra deck cards to the graveyard to gain advantage, much like Nekroz with Kaleidoscope. They all have the ability to special summon themselves from hand with fairly easy to meet conditions, and they have strong effects that have the downside of locking you out of the extra deck for the rest of the turn. You'll always want to start with Ecclesia or Disciple of the Nadir. These are your starters. Once you've done your invoked play for the turn, you'll have likely met the summon requirements of your Dragma monsters, and you can start accumulating silly amounts of advantage. The first thing you do, if possible, is activate Disciple of the Nadir to search for Ecclesia if you don't have it already, or Maximus if you do. Disciple has the added effect of dumping a monster from the extra deck to the graveyard. You usually want this to be Shaddoll Ap Cologne, for reasons I'll explore later in the video, but if you're going second, Elder Entity Intis is acceptable and even recommended. Your next play is to special summon Ecclesia. Your Mecha Ball in field allows you to do this. When Ecclesia is summoned, you grab a Dragma card from the deck, and at that point, you're locked out of the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Here's the order of importance in my opinion. First, Maximus, second, Dragma Punishment, and third, Fleur de Lis. You'll only need one of each, so base your decision off of what's already in your hand. Now it's time for Maximus. Banish an extra deck monster from your graveyard, usually Almirage left over from the invoked play, to summon this beefy 3k booty. Maximus is the king of dumping extra deck monsters for yourself and your opponent. Activating his effect allows you to send 2 extra deck monsters to the graveyard and forces your opponent to do the same. Now, the second part isn't likely to throw them off much unless they plan on activating 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance, and is actually more likely to backfire on you for reasons I'll explain later, so it balances this effect well. You'll usually be sending Bastard the Ashen Dragon and a Shaddoll monster here, Apkallone if you haven't already, or Construct if you have. Other potential targets include Wind Pegasus Ad Ignister, or my personal favorite, Lunalight Saber Dancer, but those are secondary and should only be backups if you've already opened your searchable Shaddoll card. Now that Bastard Dragon is in the graveyard, your Dragma play is over. Move to the end phase at your convenience, then trigger Bastard to search for Fleur-de-Lis. Fleur-de-Lis is the reason to play this deck. This card is bonkers. It's a hand trap monster effect negation that activates and resolves in hand and doesn't target. It's a quick effect. It's got 2500 attack and defense, and the art is sick. The requirements for summon and negation are trivially easy to meet if you are able to play at all. Just remember to leave a Dragma monster on the field for your opponent's turn so it can work. Its second effect is underrated too. When one of your Dragma monsters declares an attack, Fleur-de-Lis can make all of your Dragmas gain 500 attack permanently. This makes a board of Mechaba, Maximus, and Fleur alone 8500 damage after an Alistair boost, meaning OTKing after controlling the opponent's turn is usually on the table. Do whatever it takes to have one of these in hand go into your opponent's turn. This is the goal of your Dragma play. The last card to talk about is the Dragma Trap, Punishment. This card does a lot. It pops 2 cards if you send Intis with its effect, an Icarus attack without a tribute. If you only need the 1 monster pop, send Bastard and search on end phase. Have fun with it. This card would be a 3-of if it weren't for one little clause. Until the end of your next turn, after this card resolves, you cannot special summon from the extra deck. Blah. If it was only until the end of the current turn, it would be leagues better, but as it is, it's a good card to search with Ecclesia if you draw your more important Dragma pieces. And now it's time for a Dragma FAQ. Yeah, you in the back. Yeah, hey, hi. Will I ever fuse into Bastard Dragon? Almost certainly not. I just don't see what Albus's Nullius Filius adds to this deck, besides a ridiculous name. Hopefully some more decent support for that part of the deck will come out in a future set and make it useful though. As it stands now, just play any other form of removal. Why don't you play the other Dragma cards? Because the other Dragma cards, while they make excellent phone backgrounds, do not contribute to the strategy in any meaningful way, and frankly, the ones in this list are the only ones even worth reading. Now let's take a quick break from this FAQ to look at the third part of our deck, the Shaddoll core. Yep, that's it. That's the whole thing. This whole engine, if you can even call it that, revolves around the new trap card, Shaddoll Uruk, the card that will get Winda banned. This card lets you summon one of the most unfair cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! On your opponent's turn using graveyard resources. We all know how much Winda inhibits most decks from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And this card summons it as a quick effect for free. If that wasn't good enough for you, you also get to non-targeting send a dark monster your opponent controls to the graveyard at resolution. Uruk is essentially Artifact Sanctum plus Scythe without the Garnet, and Dragma is uniquely positioned to exploit it due to Maximus Dragma's effect. Earlier in this video I mentioned specific conditions on what to send to the graveyard with your Dragma cards. Here's your ideal play. You activate Disciple the Nadir and send Apkallone to grave to search your starter monster. Since Apkallone is 2500 attack, that's every good Dragma card. Groovy. Apkallone triggers, searching Uruk. Now you have to discard. This would normally be a drawback, but not here. Pitch Uruk to finish resolving Apkallone. Now when you activate Maximus's effect, make sure to dump Construct so that she can add your Uruk back to hand, and it's like the discard never happened. If you don't start with Disciple, don't fret. That only means you have to dump Apkallone with Maximus instead and pay the heavy price of discarding 1 card to activate your Spell Speed 2 Winda summon. Boo-hoo. One important thing to note, even if you hard draw the Uruk, make sure that you send at minimum 1 Shaddoll monster in addition to Bastard off of Disciple or Maximus. You must have the materials engraved to banish for Winda, so it's not totally free. Don't expect this part of the deck to last very long at all. Like I said, I fully expect Winda to get banned as a result of this interaction. Even so, the interaction with Apkallone is so strong, it's likely they'll be able to find another use for Uruk in the deck to abuse it, perhaps involving Shaddoll Dragon send off Construct on the opponent's turn. Most of your games will be won solely by the Shaddoll part of your deck, with the Invoked and Dragma card simply protecting it to make sure it goes off. This single card, Shaddoll Uruk, is that good. And we're back with more Dragma FAQs. Yeah, you on the right. That's only like 21 cards, man. What else should I play? Excellent question. Here's my current Dragma list. It's not made for any particular format, so many of the card choices will undoubtedly change once we know what the format will actually be in August, September, but please allow me to go through a few of my choices. Call by the Grave, as stated earlier, protects mainly my Alistair play. Other vulnerable plays can be protected by Mechaba, but getting Meltdown or Alistair hand-trapped can really make a great hand just okay. Plus, there are so many decks in 2020 that rely on powerful graveyard effects to play the game that Call by the Grave doubles as a strong piece of disruption when you set it. Hand traps make the typical Dragma Invoked board even harder to break, and make up for missing pieces of disruption if part of your engine gets stopped. This deck struggles to go second against more than 2 disruptions pre-sideboard, so the hand traps serve to weaken the opponent's field to the point you can break through with a Purgatrio play. This deck can afford to play a lot of draw power, so expect to see at least one of these pieces of disruption each game. In a pinch, most hand traps can be used to summon Almirage and secure Gardna if no invoked play is available, allowing your Dragma engine to function. I'm a big fan of playing draw power in any deck that can fit it. Hot take, I know. Cards equal options, and if I can turn spent cards into fresh options, I want to. That's why Wonder Wand is here at 3. The typical combo leaves you with 2 spellcasters on the field, and Fleur de Lis only requires you to have 1 for its effect to work. So, I can turn my spent Ecclesia into 2 new cards off the top of my deck. Wonder Wand is not once per turn like Spellbook, which will rarely come up admittedly, but the 500 attack will probably come up more. It helps you to stretch to reach OTKs and makes your Dragma monsters big enough to threaten common opposing monsters like Sunlight Wolf. In a format with more quick play back row removal, I would probably switch it for the Spellbook package. This deck can absolutely handle a Pot of Desires Banish, so it's maxed out here because I want to see it as often as possible. The only cards you would really worry about losing are your 2 Fleur de Lis, 2 Invocation, and Rook. That's hardly a problem in most cases though. The full combo to pull these cards out of the deck is only 2 cards, both maxed out at 6 to 7 copies, so you'll see them often before you ever even activate Desires. I like to play it in here like Salamangreat plays it. Grab all of your important stuff out of the deck with your combo, then activate Desires and draw into hand traps. The 1 Upstart Goblin rounds out the draw power with a small consistency boost. Any other questions? Yeah. What other extra deck cards should I consider? The only other thing that I would recommend for the extra deck that hasn't already been mentioned is a copy of Cyber Dragon Nova if this deck starts to become meta. In the mirror, if your opponent uses Maximus' effect, you can send Nova an Intis or Apcalone and really ruin their day. When Nova gets sent to the graveyard by your opponent, it triggers to summon a free Mechaba on their turn that you can use to try to disrupt the rest of their plays or force their own Mechaba negate. There are certainly more ways to abuse the send from extra deck mechanic that will emerge as the metagame solidifies after Rise of the Duelist, so I recommend reading every card that has an effect that triggers this way so you'll be able to come up with ideas to adjust to the metagame as it develops. What kind of board does this deck end on? The 2-card combo of Disciple Ecclesia plus Alistair ends on Mechaba, Maximus, and Ecclesia with a Fleur de Lis in hand and a Set Shadal Rook. This equates to an all-purpose negate, a monster effect negation, and a floodgate at minimum. You will often be able to add 1 to 2 additional disruptions from non-engine cards and or an additional pop 2 with Dragma Punishment. You with the cowboy hat, what's your question? Will this deck be meta? This deck certainly has the tools to be meta, but the status of our metagame 2 to 3 months from now is up in the air. There is a possibility that Invoke gets hit by a ban list, Winda gets banned, or the format becomes more grindy and less spammy, all of which would weaken Dragma Invoked. It has shown some promise with tops in the OCG, but those are smaller tournaments during a time when organized play is not being supported by Konami, so make sure to take them with a grain of salt. And that concludes the Dragma FAQ section of this video. Windwitch Artifact Invoked is one of my favorite decks of all time, so I'm extremely excited to play a deck that seems to be a spiritual successor to that strategy. Besides the interesting gameplay, Dragma boasts some very intriguing card art that meshes well with Alistair and his pals. The mirror match also shows promise, so I hope the Dragma Invoked will be a popular strategy this fall. And that's it for my Dragma Invoked guide. I hope you found this guide informative and entertaining, and if you're interested in seeing more content like this, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! Podcasts, deck profiles, and more, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Tampa Yu-Gi-Oh! See you next time!